human body consisting of various organs and organ systems, and these organs and organ systems must coordinate to bring homeostasis in the body. Now, this coordination in the body is brought about by neural system as well as endocrine system. And in the neural system, the central information processing organ is brain. Dear students, today we are going to talk about the structure of human brain and its functions. Brain is enclosed in the brain box called cranium, that is in the skull. And in turn, the brain is surrounded by membranes. We call them as cranial meninges. There are three cranial meninges, which is the outermost one is the dura mater, which is a tough layer. Just below it is an arachnoid, which is arranged like web, a network, a web-like structure. It's called as arachnoid. It is fluid filled. Innermost is the pia mater, and this pia mater is very thin and delicate, and it is connected with the brain tissues. Right? Now, so during the developmental stages, brain develops three parts. One is forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. So let us find out what are the parts present in the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain and their functions. First, forebrain. Forebrain has two structures. One is cerebrum, second one is diencephalon. So diencephalon in turn has thalamus as well as hypothalamus. So first we talk about cerebrum. Cerebrum is the largest part of the forebrain and is also the largest part of the brain. And cerebrum is divided by a longitudinal, divided by cleft into two longitudinal halves. We call them as cerebral hemispheres. This is one. So these two cerebral hemispheres are referred to as right and left cerebral hemisphere, or we call them as right and left brains. And these two cerebral hemispheres are connected by corpus callosum, which is a character of all mammals, which makes a communication. Next, on the cerebrum, there are several ridges. The ridges are called gyri, and in between the ridges, there are grooves which are called as sulcus. These ridges and grooves will increase the surface area of the cerebrum for accommodating more number of neurons. So as a result, it was noticed that 10% of the neuronal activity in our body alone occurs in cerebrum. So it can accommodate so many neurons. Next, cerebrum, right? Because the two cerebral hemispheres, and when you come across the cerebrum, each cerebral hemisphere has four lobes. One is the frontal lobe, second is the parietal lobe, third is the temporal lobe, fourth is the occipital lobe. Now these lobes perform different functions. Like frontal lobe is involved in controlling all the voluntary muscular activities, whereas your parietal lobe is responsible for sense of touch, hot, cold, and pain. Once it will identify this, it will send a signal to the frontal lobe. Say for an example, when you touch a hot substance, withdraw your hand, right? This is what normally happens. That means when you touch a hot substance, your parietal lobe understands or interprets this particular sense and send a signal to the frontal lobe. So frontal lobe is responsible for voluntary muscular activity. You just withdraw your hand. This is how this parietal lobe is in turn connected to the frontal lobe. Next, your temporal lobe is responsible for perceiving the auditory reflexes, right? So what is being spoken, right? So this particular coordination is done in the temporal lobe. whereas your occipital lobe is responsible for all the visual reflexes. Like when you see any object, you just identify. For example, if this is a marker, right? So if it is shown, you say that yes, this is a marker. Visual reflexes. Fine. Next, in the cerebrum, in the entire cerebral hemispheres, there are some areas which are exclusively meant for motor controlling. Matlab your muscle movement. There are some centers which are responsible for sensory, and there are some association areas. And association areas are neither purely sensory nor motor, but they are responsible for memory. Number 2, they are responsible for communication. Number 3, they are responsible for intersensory association. Meaning is, say for example, if you can see this marker, you can see, right? And at the same time, even if you want, you can smell also, right? So this is what you call intersensory associations. This is brought about by your cerebrum. Next, we have thalamus. Cerebrum wraps around the thalamus. So thalamus is the principal coordinating center for motor as well as sensory signaling. We call it as a relay center. Just below the thalamus at its base is present hypothalamus. And hypothalamus has different centers where it will regulate the body temperature. So thermoregulation, osmoregulation, your thirst, right? Drinking water, right? So your appetite, right? So all these centers are present in the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus controls all this, right? So this is what is your forebrain with cerebrum, thalamus and hypothalamus. Next, we have one more most interesting coordinating center in the brain, which is called limbic system. So some parts of the cerebrum, already we have discussed hypothalamus, hippocampus and amygdala. These structures form limbic system, which is called limbic lobe. This limbic system or limbic lobe, right, is responsible for controlling sexual behavior, and also emotional reactions are under the control of limbic system. So let us find out what functions it will perform. Like your amygdala, it is responsible for, or it has centers for fear, anxiety, anger, sexual attraction, all are under the control of amygdala. Hippocampus is principally involved in controlling the memory. It is responsible for converting your short-term to long-term memory. That means in a short-term memory, you can just remember the things just for a few minutes. And when it goes to the long-term memory, you can keep the things or you remember the things for a longer periods of time. This is done by your hippocampus. This is how your limbic system is overall responsible for controlling the sexual behavior as well as emotional reactions. It was noticed that in any individual, if amygdala is damaged or amygdala is lost, they do not show any symptoms of fear, even if they are sent to a haunted house. Like if suppose hippocampus is damaged, there is no memory, it may result in amnesia, right? So this is how your limbic system is responsible for all emotional reactions controlling. Next, coming to the midbrain. Midbrain is located just below the hypothalamus and just above the pons. The midbrain is located. Midbrain, on its dorsal side, it has 4 lobes, and this condition is called as corpora quadrigemina. This is a character in mammals once again. Next, what are these lobes are responsible for? These lobes are responsible for controlling auditory as well as optic signaling. Next, in the midbrain, there is a space, and this space in the midbrain is called as iter, or this is called cerebral aqueductus. Cerebral aqueductus is a space present in the midbrain. So where cerebrospinal fluid passes to the fourth ventricle through this iter or cerebral aqueductus, right? Next, coming to the last, hindbrain. Hindbrain is with three structures. This is called Pons, this is called your cerebellum, and this is the medulla. Coming to the Pons. Pons is located just below the midbrain, and Pons is having a fibers of tracts, right, which connect various parts of the brain, and the Pons has breathing and sleep wake up cycle controlling centers, right? And Pons verily is connected with cranial nerves number 5 to 8. These 4 cranial nerves are connected to the Pons. Next, cerebellum. Just look at the cerebellum. Cerebellum is more convoluted. This is also to provide space for accommodating more number of neurons. And cerebellum is also lobed structure, and the cerebellum controls and coordinates the voluntary activities like walking, right, or in case of like your skipping, this voluntary coordination is brought about by cerebellum. Next, medulla oblongata is connected to the spinal cord, and medulla controls respiration, breathing rate, and also it has gastric secretions controlling centers, and also cardiovascular centers are also located in the medulla. Now just look into this part, like your midbrain, Pons and medulla all lie in one axis. So this forms the brain stem. The brain stem is formed by these three structures, your midbrain, Pons and medulla. Guys, this is the structure of brain.